There's a book in the Bible where the name of God is never mentioned. However, the hand of God is seen on every page. This book is found in the Old Testament. It's the book of Esther. If you want to follow along with today's message, you can turn there. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to unpack the entire Esther narrative. We'll discuss, and I will tell you, and I will unpack the entire book for you today. I'm going to do that from the perspective of one of the minor characters in the book. And so, I'm not going to trick you like I did last year. I'm actually going to tell you the story from the perspective of one of the characters in the book. And what you see in the book of Esther, like I said, is not the name of God. And some scholars have questioned, should this even be in the canon? The name of God is never mentioned. But what you see is the presence of God throughout this entire narrative. Good morning. My name is Harbona. My name? Not that significant, except for the fact that it's found in your Holy Scriptures, your Old Testament, the book of Esther. My job? Depends on what country you're in. In your country, I would be more like a male private secretary to the president. In my country, Persia, I am Harbona, chamberlain to King Xerxes. You may know him as Ahasuerus in your scriptures. I hesitated to take the job at first. Xerxes was, how shall I put it, he was unpredictable at times. For instance, there was one of his high-ranking officials who offered to pay millions of dollars into one of his military campaigns. Well, Xerxes, so moved by this act of loyalty and this act of generosity, Xerxes blesses him and says, No. I'm honored that you would offer me, but keep your money. In fact, he then sends a gift to this official. Well, later on, when this high-ranking official hinted at the fact that maybe his son not be a part of the military campaign, Xerxes was so enraged that he brought the son in, had him cut into, and then marched his army between the two halves of this boy. Xerxes was unpredictable. There was a storm that arose on the sea one night, destroyed 300 of his ships. Xerxes, in a fit of rage, goes down to the sea, takes a leather straps, and for every one of those ships that was destroyed, he smacks the sea 300 times. He would fall into these bouts of depression. He would make irrational judgment calls at times, and then later go back and regret what he had done. So you can see why I was nervous and apprehensive about taking the job, but I decided to do it. It was a great opportunity to live in the palace, be the personal attendant to the king. So I decided, don't get too involved. Go with the flow. Attend to the king's needs. Kind of remain in the background. Just go with the flow. So that's what I did. Well, things went well. The kingdom was, things were going okay. There was some concern, in Persia about the Babylonians, and their conquest, but we were still a pretty powerful empire. And Xerxes was definitely one of the most powerful kings. Well, time goes on, and Xerxes fell into another bout of depression. You see, after one of his drunken parties, which he had many of, he had requested that his queen, Queen Vashti, be come before him, and he would display her and her beauty as his own to those of his palace guests. Well, the queen refused. I mean, I went to it personally. The king says, Harbona, bring Vashti to the party. So I go and I say, Queen Vashti, the king has decreed that your presence be seen at his dinner, and she refused. Not a wise decision, understanding the nature of King Xerxes, but she refused. And so in a fit of rage, and due to the counsel of some of his men, he had Queen Vashti, he wrote a decree, and he sent it out throughout the kingdom to all peoples, to all languages, to all tribes, that Queen Vashti be removed from his presence, never to be brought before him again. Well, he's in a bout of depression, and he starts moping again. And he's around the palace, and his head is low, and, oh, Vashti, how I did Vashti wrong. Can you bring Vashti back? A decree's been signed, my king. You cannot reverse an order sealed with the king's signet ring by the law of the Medes and the Persians. It cannot be reversed. Oh. There's no sense in wallowing in the past. After all, what's done is done. How could we help the king? How could we bring him out of this depression? I thought about it. Then it came to me. Women, and lots of them. So I go, and King Xerxes, what if we brought the most beautiful young virgins into the palace? And they came in before you, and they were brought before you, and from those most beautiful young women in the kingdom, you can choose for yourself a new queen. He took it. He liked the idea. So we sent out throughout the kingdom and throughout the city of Susa, we gathered the most beautiful young virgins of all of the city. For some, this was a great privilege. For others, not so much. They had to leave family. And we took them from their families and brought them into the palace. Prepared them, made them beautiful, and each one of them was brought before the king. As far as I was concerned, he picked the best one. Beautiful young woman. Her name was Esther. She didn't really look Persian to me. No matter. She was a good queen, and the king was back to his old self. Things went on for 4 or 5 years. And then a series of circumstances happened in the kingdom that I'm still trying to make sense of. A series of consequences that are really quite remarkable. And that's what I want to talk to you guys about today. That's the story I want to tell you. You see, there was a man in the kingdom. His name was Haman. I didn't care for Haman too much. You'll see why. Haman was young and energetic and full of passion, but he was a suck-up. You know, he rose quickly through the ranks of our State Department to the point where the king loved him so much, I didn't like him at all. The king loved Haman. Appointed him second in command in the kingdom. Haman comes in before the king one day and asks an incredibly drastic request. He says, "King, there is a people that lives among us that live according to their own laws. They don't live according to your laws, king. And so if it please the king, I'll even put in my own funds to execute a campaign that will deal with these people." Well, Xerxes, asking no questions, Sure, Haman, yeah, whatever you think is best. If you feel like, this is the best course of action, go ahead. Here's my signet ring, make a decree. And Xerxes just said, take care of it, Haman. Now, it was strange. Oh, and Xerxes said, by the way, use state funds. Don't use your own funds, Haman. It was strange to me. Not Xerxes, that was like him. Sometimes he had no regard for human life. He let Haman kind of do what he felt was best. But it was Haman that puzzled me, because Haman wasn't generally loose and free with his own money that way to offer to pay for campaigns like this. Well, the decree went out to every man in his own language, to every tribe, to every person, signed and sealed with the ring and the signet of the king himself, which means, according to the laws of Persia, it could not be revoked. Not even the king himself could revoke it. Well, I get a copy of it. The decree by the king Xerxes of Persia, to every man in his own language, to every tribe in the kingdom, on the 13th day of December, the last month, a decree goes out to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate. I stopped. Destroy, kill, annihilate. That'll do it. Every Jew, every man, woman, and child, and to confiscate their property. What is Haman's problem with the Jews? Why such a drastic decree to destroy, kill, and annihilate all men, women, and children? He wanted to totally destroy an entire race of people. And he had the authority to do it. I didn't like Haman. What was his problem with the Jews anyway? As far as I could tell, they were a peaceful people. They lived among us. They were captives from their own homeland. And even under the Persian rule, many of them were free to go back to their own, wherever they came from. Many of them stayed in Persia because they had nice lives there. They weren't. Well, I come to find out, Haman wanted to eradicate an entire race of people because of one man. His name was Mordecai. You see, in Persia, we have what we call a citizens' council. A citizens' council is made up from one representative from each major people group within our kingdom. And they would decide on minor matters in the kingdom that the king would rather not have to deal with. And so this council would meet every day and decide on these matters. Well, Haman was over this council. And periodically, Haman would attend to the council and oversee the council. And one of the laws that was made is when Haman would enter, every member of that citizens' council would have to pay homage to Haman, bow before him. Well, Mordecai, because of his own religious beliefs, didn't feel like it was proper, or didn't feel like he could bow before Haman, so he didn't. He refused to bow before Haman. So day after day, week after week, Haman would come into the council. All of the representatives would bow before Haman, but there would be one man, Mordecai, who every single time Haman would come in, Mordecai just stood there. It so infuriated Haman. He got so angry at Mordecai, so frustrated with Mordecai, that because of his anger and his bitterness toward one man, he goes before the king and says, "Destroy, kill, and annihilate all Jews." Haman. I didn't like him. I thought about saying something to the king, but I was not about to get between Haman and the king. You know, go with the flow, right? Don't get too involved. Besides, the decree was sealed with the king's signet. Couldn't be revoked. What could I do? So I just kept my mouth shut and just went with the flow. Well, the next day, after the decree had been spread throughout the city and was beginning to be spread throughout the kingdom, and people were reading it, I'm walking in the outer court of the palace, and I hear this awful moaning, this awful wailing. And this man, I look, he's just outside the gate of the palace, and he is wailing, and he's, oh, is me. And he's dressed in these rags, and he's got ashes and soot all over him. He looks dreadful. And what's he doing out there? What is this man wailing at the gate of the palace for? So I proceed to go and to try and deal with him. And as I'm walking through the court, I run into Hatak. Hatak was the personal attendant to Queen Esther. And Hatak has a change of clothes. And I stop him and I say, hello, Hatak. And Hatak says, oh, pardon me, Harbona, I'm going out to attend to the man outside the gate. The queen has asked me to tend to his needs and to give him a change of clothing. Oh, all right. You take care of it then. I guess you got it under control. I thought to myself, Esther, she's all heart. She's so caring. She's so loving. You know what? That's just like Esther, to care for a poor soul wailing outside the city gate. What a good queen. Well, a few moments later, Hatak comes back after speaking with this man outside the gate. But he has the change of clothes that the queen herself offered to him. I said, what's wrong? Weren't they his size? Hatak says, he refused them. What do you mean he refused them? These are a gift from the queen. He refuses them. And he continues to wail at the gate of the palace. But do you know who that is, Harbona? I don't know who that is. The man at the gate wailing? That's Mordecai, the Jewish representative of the Citizens' Council. Oh, well, he does have something to cry about then, if he's read the decree. Hatak says, yes, he gave me a copy of the decree, and he asked me to take the decree and to bring it to Queen Esther. And then he asked Esther to go before the king himself and plead the case of the Jews. Now, that was strange to me. What concern is this of the queen? This has nothing to do with her. This isn't her issue. This isn't her battle. It didn't make any sense to me. What was Mordecai the Jew asking the queen to do with this decree? And then Hatak says, oh, and by the way, Esther hasn't been asked for in over 30 days. I know. The Xerxes, he's in one of his moods again. If she goes before the queen, Hatak says, uninvited, if the king doesn't call her, it could mean most certain immediate death to her. So the queen is nervous to go before the king at all right now. He hasn't called for her in 30 days, and if she just automatically out of the blue approaches him, he could have her put to death right there on the spot. But Hatak takes the decree and says, give me that, and I got to go talk to the queen. Okay, Hatak, good luck. It didn't make any sense to me at first. Why Mordecai the Jew would want Esther the queen to get involved, to risk her own life? I mean, Esther was a good queen, but this was no concern of hers. Well, I went on with my duties for the day. The next day, I was walking on the second floor of the palace, attending to my duties, and I see Haytak again, the queen's attendant. Haytak, Harbona, come over here. Okay, what is it, Haytak? You're never going to believe this. I mean, he was sitting down. He's like, you sit down. I'm like, I'm good. No, you sit down. I'm good, Haytak, just tell me. He's like, you know Mordecai? The Jewish representative mourning outside the city gate yesterday? Yeah, I remember. Mordecai is Queen Esther's uncle. The queen is a Jewish. No wonder she didn't look Persian. Are you serious? Yeah. And Haytak goes on to tell me, I went back to Mordecai that night to tell him, Mordecai, the king hasn't asked for the queen in over 30 days. If she goes before him, she could die. I just think that's too big of a risk. And then Mordecai gave a message to Haytak to give to Queen Esther. Pay close attention to what Mordecai said. Mordecai looked at Haytak and says, knowing full well the risks involved in going before the king, Mordecai, who loved his niece, had raised her as his own, said, Queen, don't even think that with this decree that your own life will be spared. But perhaps you have been brought into the kingdom and made queen for such a time as this. In other words, Mordecai believed that his God was actually big enough to place Queen Esther as queen over Persia at just such the right time that this decree would go out and she would be able to do something about it. Mordecai actually believed that his God was big enough and powerful enough to do such a thing. Now, listen. If a God was that big, and if there was a God with that much power, well, he certainly would be a God to consider, huh? I don't know. Coincidences happen all the time. But this was news. Haytak goes on to tell me, I went before the queen. And Haytak says, Harbona, I said to the queen, exactly what Mordecai said to tell me. And the queen, obviously distraught, the queen in despair, the queen, looks as though her entire world, she loves her people. They claim to have a personal covenant relationship with the God of heaven. They really believe that, and they believe their God is worthy to be worshipped, and they believe their God is, and they believe they are God's special people that God has entered into a covenant relationship with, and her world is just crumbling, Harbona. Her world, you could see it on her countenance. She's struggling, and she's in despair, and she looks at me, and I'll never forget her response, Harbona. Haytak says, she looks at me and she says, I go before the king, and if I perish, I perish. See, Queen Esther was willing to take her own life and set it aside so that others could be saved. I'll just be honest with you. I never would do that. I go with the flow, you know what I mean? Not get too involved. But Esther, willing to lay down her life so that her people could be saved. There's something about her. There's something about these people, the Jews, and their faith in their God. I've never seen anything like it before. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of gods around, and we worship gods, and be honest with you, we don't even know what God we're worshiping half the time. There's a God for this and a God for that. But these Jews, they were different. They believed in one God. I know, weird. I know. They believed in one God who was sovereign over everything. Well, the story goes on because it gets stranger. The queen prepares herself to go before King Xerxes. So she gets all of her attendants together and they fix her up. And the next day, the king is holding court. All of his officials are around. All of his guard is around. He's holding court. And remember, he's been in one of his moods. And the door opens. And I can see, out of my eye, it's Queen Esther. I got nervous, I'll be honest with you. I hope this turns out well. And Esther approaches the king's throne uninvited. The king's guard stands up. They draw their swords. Some of the king's officials say, "Who is this that approaches the king uninvited? Whoever approaches the king deserves to die. Take her out and remove her head." Oh, this is not going good. This is not going good. And I'm looking at Xerxes, and I'm looking at the expression on his face, and Xerxes remembers the love he has for Esther, and Xerxes remembers the care and the concern. He can be a real softy sometimes if he wants to, and Xerxes stays the swords of his soldiers, and he takes his scepter, and he invites the queen to approach him. Boy, was she lucky. Man. Man. She approaches. The king, Xerxes, looks down and says, "Esther, my queen, what is your request? I'll give you anything, up to half my kingdom. What is it? Name it." All right, here we go. Esther's going to foil Haman's plot, right? She doesn't. She goes before the king. She says, "King, I would like to invite you and your highest-ranking official, Haman, to a privately catered lunch this afternoon. Just for you." Okay. Sounds pretty good. So I'm thinking, okay, get Haman alone with the king, and so lunch comes. The king and Haman are reclining. Esther and the maids are bringing the food, and they're enjoying the meal. It's an amazing meal. There's food, there's wine. It was fantastic. And the king approaches Esther and says, "Esther, there's something on your mind. I can see it in your face. There's something you desire of me. Ask for it, name it, whatever it is, up to half my kingdom, and it's yours." I said, "This is it. What are you waiting for? Tell him." But she didn't tell him. She didn't tell him then. It would have been too soon. But all she said was, "King, if I found favor in your sight, and if it please you, come again to another lunch tomorrow that I shall prepare for you and Haman." Well, the king looks at her and says, "You're playing games with me, queen." And Haman says, "They always do." Haman. I didn't like Haman. Go with the flow, right? So the king says, "It would please us to join you for lunch tomorrow." Now, had Esther kind of unpacked everything at that point, it would have been a little too early. The king wouldn't have been prepared for it just yet. So for whatever reason, she decided, I'm going to wait till tomorrow at another lunch. But what happened in between the first lunch and the second lunch, this is really strange. I've got to tell you about this, because this is where, coincidences they abound. Later that night, Haman throws a party for all of his friends. The point of Haman's party was to celebrate himself. All of his successes, how he had advanced through the State Department to second in command, how Haman had done this and Haman had done that, and he had found favor with the king, and now he was even being invited to privately catered lunches with the king and the queen themselves. Look at my glory. You ever been to a party like that? Haman. But then Haman kind of got to thinking, the only thing that I don't have, Mordecai. So in the midst of talking about all of his splendor and all of his glory, he gets to talking about Mordecai. He begins to seethe. He begins to get angry. Mordecai won't bow to me, won't pay homage to me. Mordecai defies me. All of a sudden, the party took a turn. You know what I mean? Like, okay, this is not going anywhere good. Well, Haman's attendants and friends said, well, let's deal with Mordecai. What do you mean, says Haman. Well, why don't you go before the king tomorrow and explain how Mordecai is defiant and won't live according to the laws, and have him hanged. Mordecai says, that's the best idea I've heard all day. Well, let's go. Let's command a gallows to be fixed in the back, courtyard here. You know the party's gone bad when you start making a gallows to hang someone, all right? Yeah. Like what kind of people? This was Haman. Like when you start making the gallows, it'd be a good time to, hey, I got to go. So they build the gallows, 50 cubits high. They didn't mess around. These gallows were meant for people to see who was hanging on that from all over the city. So Haman's plan is coming together. Except an amazing coincidence happened. That night, we're at sleep in the palace, and the king has a case of insomnia. Now, he always slept fine. Always very tired at night, just slept fine. But tonight, this particular night, he has to have insomnia. So I'm asleep in my quarters next door, and I hear the king, Harbona, Harbona! Yes, my king. Harbona! I can't sleep. I can see that. Bring me something and read to me. I can bring you the chronicles and memoirs of your reign. That should put you to sleep. Yes, fine, go. So I grab the scrolls and I come before him and I ask, how far back do you want me to read? I didn't know where to start. 2-3 years back is fine. All right. So I began to read. I read about some of his battles that he had won. I knew he'd like that. Read about, that's a battle he lost. We'll skip that. No. This law was made, this blah, 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 blah. He's not falling asleep. Certainly, and then I come to a paragraph. I just happened to come to a paragraph. It caught my attention. Because I saw a name I recognized. It was the name Mordecai, the Jewish representative, the uncle of the queen. Mordecai, the Jewish representative, overhears a plot to kill the king, alerts the queen, and the king's life is saved by the loyalty and bravery of the Jewish representative Mordecai. The king perks up and says, I remember that. Yeah. Two of my advisors, they were going to kill me, and the Jewish representative, Mordecai, he alerted the queen. He saved my life. Harbona, has anything been done to reward Mordecai and to honor him for saving my life? Well, nothing was done. Mordecai, remind me, in the morning, first thing in the morning, we're going to take care of that. We're going to honor Mordecai. Okay. Tomorrow morning, Haman wants to have Mordecai hanged. The king wants to honor him. I can't wait till morning. First thing in the morning, the king wakes up. Harbona! Yes, my king. Harbona, we need to honor Mordecai. We need to honor him. Is there anyone out in the court that can help me with this? Looks as though Haman's out there. Maybe he can help. Yes, bring Haman in. So Haman, what is it, Harbona? Haman was not in a good mood, but he was hopeful. The king would like to see you. Oh, he perks up. Good, because I would like to see the king. Awesome, that works out great. Come on in. I just stood back and watched. This was going to be good. Haman, the king says, what shall be done to the man that I choose to honor? Haman thought it was him. I mean, after all, who in the kingdom would the king like to honor more than Haman? Haman stands there, thinking to himself, finally, I'll get rid of Mordecai. I'll be honored today. Everything is coming together. Get rid of the Jews. King Xerxes, if it please you, the man whom you wish to honor, let the royal ceremonial robes be put upon this man. Let a gold crown be placed upon his head. Put him upon the king's finest stallion, and have one of your officials parade him through the city, declaring, this is the king, or the man the king wishes to honor, all throughout the city. The king, yes, Haman, you're very good at this. That's a great idea. I couldn't have come up with anything better. Okay, everything that you said, all of that, take that and do that unto the Jewish representative Mordecai. I wish you could have seen Haman's face at that point. His countenance dropped. His plan to murder Mordecai, out the window. It was awesome. I'm standing there. I didn't like Haman. I don't know if I told you that. Didn't like him. Didn't care for him. So the king, Haman, go, hurry. Mordecai will be heading here for the council meetings this morning. Take everything and meet him. And Haman, yell loudly. I owe this man my life. I have to say I enjoyed watching Haman dress Mordecai in the royal robes and place him on the stallion, parade through the city. This is the man the king wishes to honor. This is the man the king wishes to, all day. It was awesome. It was amazing. Well, the morning passed and Haman gets done with his task and he pulls himself together because after all, he's getting ready for his second lunch with the king and the queen. So he pulls himself together. You see the events that took place between the two lunches? See what happened? Yeah. Very interesting. It was a perfect time to talk to the king. So they're sitting at lunch. They're eating and they're drinking, and the king approaches Esther again. He says, Queen Esther, something is on you. Something weighs heavily on you. What is it that you want? Ask of it, anything, up to half my kingdom, and it's yours. And the queen kneels before the king. She says, King, if it please you, and if I found favor in your sight, I ask that you give me my life. The king was obviously confused. Your life, Esther? What are you talking about? Give me my life and the lives of my people. The king, still confused. The lives of your people? Who would dare take your life? Who would dare take the lives of your people? Point the man out right now. Queen Esther looks and she points out Haman. Haman is the man that would seek to destroy, kill, and annihilate me and my peoples. Xerxes. The decree that Haman wanted is against you and your people. The king was in such a rage, such a fury. He had to leave. He left the area and he had to go think. He had to get himself under control. Haman is afraid. So Haman approaches the queen, begins to beg for his life. Queen Esther, I didn't know that these were your people. Queen Esther, she didn't want to hear it. So Haman begins to grovel. He begins to get at her feet, and he begins to grab her cloak, and he begins to grab her dress. And he begins to beg for his life, and he begins to ask her to spare him. Well, Xerxes comes back in and sees that, gets the wrong idea. Says, "Take that man! Would you molest the queen in my own house?" The king is angry. He says, "Put the death veil over his face." That meant when the death veil was lowered, no more were you to be ever brought before the presence of the king, but to be taken out and executed. Now, I don't normally get involved, but I thought this was safe. So I said, "King Xerxes." "Yes, Harbona." It just so happens that last night at a party, Haman had a gallows fixed. He wanted to hang Mordecai on it. Just a suggestion. It's a fresh gallows. "Hang him on it," the king says. So the king has Haman hanged. And a new decree is written that on the 13th day of the last month, the day in which the Jews are to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated, that the Jews are able to band together, to gather weapons, and to defend themselves, and to confiscate the property of those who would attack them. So a decree was sent out to balance the previous decree. Oh, you should have seen the Jews dancing in the street that night. This gave them hope that they would not be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. This gave them hope that the promises that their God had made them, that God was going to keep their promises. And later on that night, I'm in the courtyard of the palace, and I begin to think to myself all the events that took place over the past few weeks. How Queen Esther, at just the right time, was appointed queen over Persia. How her uncle Mordecai happened to be the Jewish representative that just happened to overhear a plot to kill the king and save the king's life. How unusual it was that the queen asked for 2 lunches, and the king just happened to have insomnia that night in between the 2 lunches. I looked over and I could see Haman hanging on the gallows. The Jews dancing in the streets. The queen, her favor restored with the king. Mordecai, his life spared and him honored. I thought about all of that. Either this is a series of coincidences that are unexplainable, or there's something behind all of this. Is it that Mordecai's God is that powerful? Or that the Jewish people are just that lucky? The God who called you, the God who knew you and chose you from before the foundation of the world. He is the same God who right now holds you in His hands. The God who sits on a throne, exalted above all creation. This King we call Jesus, who in love came and rescued you, who laid down His life so that you could be made His own. This same Jesus, in spite of the fact that we live in a world that looks like it's falling apart, in spite of the fact that at times life around us seems like it's falling apart, we can know for certain, church, that there is a King who sits on a throne. He is in control. He is sovereign, and He ordains the affairs of men and women. He raises up kings and He puts them down. He raises up leaders and He puts them down, but you are the one whom He holds in His hand. And if I can just give you today a picture from this narrative in the book of Esther of a big God on a big throne, ruling not only the big affairs of life, but also the very small, minute details of your life, that He holds you in His hand. And if we can walk away today understanding a little bit more of the sovereignty of God, that He sits on a throne. I'm going to have the worship team come. We are going to end with that song, Revelation song, because that song gives us a picture. Revelation chapters 4 and 5, you see the Apostle John with a vision, and he's in the throne room of Jesus. He's sitting on a throne, ruling everything. And the language from this song is taken from Revelation 4 and 5. I have no idea what you're experiencing in life right now. I don't know. What I do know is that God is sovereign over all of it. What I do know is that nothing has slipped through His hands. Nothing has slipped through His fingers. What I do know is the God who chose you from before the foundation of the world is the God who holds you today. And we can rest in that. So let's stand and worship our sovereign God.